There's something so special about hags and witches in the world of fantasy. As a GM, they're among my favorite archetype of character to put in any game I'm running, and as a player, they're super fun to interact with, if not a little bit terrifying. I mean, we've all heard countless tales of a witch cursing someone and turning them into some kind of animal.
Whoa, she turned me into a newt! A newt! I got better.
And while this is certainly an unfortunate fate for any adventurer, those cursed by witches, fate, or some other curse-dispensing apparatus are incredible individuals to use as a random encounter, a side quest, or even a major part of your game's story. So today, we're talking about one such group of cursed individuals, the Dog Boys. Maybe it's just me, but I love a monster that tells you exactly what it is in the name. And Dog Boys are exactly what the name would suggest. They're boys who are now dogs. Kinda. They were first printed in a book that hasn't actually been printed yet because they're not from D&D at all, but rather from Legend in the Mist. If you're a regular viewer around these parts, you've definitely heard me talk about this game before. It's that one rustic fantasy RPG from the folks who made City of Mist, and I felt like covering a monster from a game that is entirely different from D&D, at least mechanically, but shares a lot of the same fantasy DNA, could be really fun as a challenge and as a chance to explore a creature literally out of left field. Plus, as I always say, one of the best things you can do to improve as a GM is to explore as many systems as possible. You never know what you might learn along the way, and sometimes you even find a new game you like. But we'll get into mechanics in a little bit here. First and foremost, we need to talk about the nature of magical curses and what a dog boy even is. According to the source book, dog boys are the result of a horrible curse inflicted on some rowdy youths, thus transforming them from normal boys into dog boys. The origin of the curse itself is not unilateral, so it's possible that this curse stems from a couple different places. As I've been alluding to, one extremely likely candidate for bestowing such a curse is a witch or hag, as I mean, come on. Nobody loves a shape-shifting curse quite like a mysterious old lady. It's possible that the original dog boys were a group of miscreants messing around with the witch's property in some way. Perhaps they wandered into her apple orchard and just started taking what they please, or maybe they were messing around with an alley cat, not realizing it was actually the witch's familiar. Whatever the case, in this scenario, they did something to piss off a witch, and bada bing, bada boom, dog boys. The other element of this curse that I find really interesting is that it can be broken in two different ways. The first is to just brute force it, doing the equivalent of using a magic crowbar to pull out a magic nail by casting powerful magic capable of breaking the curse. The second way is to fulfill the conditions of the curse. In this case, that means if the dog boy in question performs 3 acts of genuine kindness, the curse is broken and they will be able to return to their normal form. Because while dog boys might be kind of dickish, they aren't compelled to be that way. They're just jerks who were likely cursed because they were a jerk to the wrong person one time. So basically, if they just stop being such assholes, the curse will eventually work itself out. However, when it comes to a hag's hex, the punishment is often a cruel irony or even some sort of sick joke in and of itself. See Chihiro's parents in Spirited Away, they were turned into pigs for pigging out at a buffet not meant for them. Or see just any of the hag-related stuff in Baldur's Gate 3. So it stands to reason that if the original targets of this curse were turned into dog hybrids, they were probably doing something the person casting the spell saw as dog-adjacent behavior. Obviously that is up to the original curse-e, but we can extrapolate from there that the boys were likely up to some mischief. Maybe they were snatching food from the witch's pantry, or maybe it was a classic pie on the windowsill sort of thing. It could also be that they were simply being loud and boisterous in the witch's vicinity and she got tired of their shenanigans, or maybe they stole something from her and ran off, so she simply muttered something to the effect of, if you're gonna act like a pack of wild dogs, then you might as well have the appearance to match. Maybe the hag was doing it to teach them a lesson, or maybe she was just being cruel. But however you do the math, we're solving for dog boys. The other possibility mentioned in the book is that the boys may have ventured into a cursed land, going somewhere they were simply not meant to be. This puts a bit of a different spin on the whole thing, because if that is the version of the story we go with, their crime was less about crossing the wrong individual and more about breaking a taboo. This is another classic folktale consequence. You've got some place that the locals know, it's just not a place that you're supposed to go. It could be an old dryad's glade, the site of an an ancient and dangerous ritual, or even the border of a magically powerful kingdom. Whatever the case, this is a place that you are not supposed to be, and of course, the boys decided to go there. It's almost like telling a bunch of teenagers they're not supposed to do something just makes them want to do it even more. So much like Adam and Eve chowing down on the one piece of fruit they weren't supposed to eat, the boys inexorably wandered into the forbidden place and got all dog-faced about it for their trouble. Both instances have a lot of storytelling potential, and hey, maybe you've even got an idea or origin of the curse of your own that doesn't follow either of these tropes, because Lord knows there are just so many ways to get cursed in a medieval fantasy. But before we get into the minutia of how you could craft an encounter at your game table with these accursed creatures, I want to take a minute to talk about their mechanics and just exactly what they can do. Legend in the Mist is a really unique game that provides an entirely different way to interact with the world when compared to more traditional systems like D&D. This is what the stat block for Dog Boys looks like in their native system. You'll notice that there are very few numbers here, and that's because in this game your backstory literally is your character sheet, and the same is true for any monster, NPC, or challenge that the heroes might go up against. You still roll dice to determine outcomes, but rather than, say, having a strength of +3 and a +2 proficiency bonus added on to a d20 roll to see if you clear the armor class of your enemy when you attack with a longsword, in this system you would roll 2d6 and add +1 to your result for every positive tag you can invoke to help you succeed. For example, let's say Garen the Desert Wandering Swordmaster wants to attack the Dog Boys with his weapon. He has a longsword, so that's gonna help him here. He is also a formidable weapon master, and he's mastered the precision strike technique, so that's gonna give him a +3 to his roll. However, he's been alone in the desert for years now, and he harbors some fear about blurring the lines between man and monster, so the GM might invoke the loss of self weakness tag that Garen carries, which is gonna give him a -1 to the roll. But thankfully, Garen used his weapon maintenance tag at camp last night to sharpen up his blade, so he gains the benefit of his sword sharpness +2 status for this action, meaning that all said and done, he'll end up with a total of +4 to his roll. He rolls 2d6 and gets a 4, so with the bonuses from his invoked tags, that's a total of 8, not quite the flawless success he wanted by rolling above a 10, but it's still above a 6, which means that he succeeds in wounding the Dog Boys, though not without any consequence. So that's when we look over at the Dog Boys game stats, and the GM decides on an appropriate consequence for his actions. They might swarm the lone fighter, giving him the Surrounded 3 status, which will make it harder for him to succeed on his next course of action. Or maybe one of the boys takes this opportunity to grab his backpack in the chaos, giving Garen 2 stacks of the short on supplies status, which might not matter much in the immediate battle, but if the Dog Boys escape, it will likely cause problems later when he continues his journey across the desert. Now this is all a pretty simplified explanation of how the general flow of taking a turn works in Legend in the Mist, but you get the idea. Heroes and NPCs use their traits, items, and statuses to either help or hinder every action they take, which puts the game into a really unique category. Because yes, it is very obviously a narrative-focused RPG, but if you choose to engage with all the optional rules, it can be pretty crunchy too. It's weird to describe a narrative game as having crunch to it, but as soon as the game clicked for me, it made me realize why every other narrative RPG I had tried to play up until this point just didn't scratch the itch in the way I wanted it to. Anyways, I thought it would be really fun to try and translate this creature's abilities into D&D 5e, both as a bit of an exercise in interpreting different game systems, but also to show how easy it can be to move between these two systems. I was expecting this to be kind of challenging, but everything you need to know is right there on the sheet. The only real arbitrary decision I had to make was what CR we wanted to put the Dog Boys at, and it felt like a CR of 1 for an individual Dog Boy was appropriate. So with that in mind, looking at their Legend in the Mist sheet, their harm limit is 2, which tells us they aren't super beefy, but they can take a couple hits before bowing out of the fight, so a max HP of 37 felt appropriate. Their scare limit is 3, which means they're a little more difficult to scare off than to fend off, which I interpreted as them having proficiency in wisdom saves along with a decent wisdom score, since that's usually the thing that gets targeted by fear effects in Dungeons & Dragons. Their parlay limit is at 4, which means it's very hard for them to be convinced of most things, let alone simply talked down from their aggressive action, so this means that they get a decent charisma score and proficiency in charisma saves as well. Their Hound's sense of smell tag is pretty 1-to-1 with expertise and perception, so my stat block gives them a +7 on account of the good old sniffer and big old dog ears they've got. Also on account of their growl, which has a chance to intimidate heroes or spook their mounts, I gave them proficiency with intimidation. which is pretty much 1-to-1. They also have might in a specific area, which for them is numbers. When you're playing Legend in the Mist, that means that anyone who isn't specifically good at dealing with large groups of creatures would take a -3 to their die rolls in any situation where the dog boy's numbers are a factor. In D&D, to me, that means pack tactics. Either way, the end result is that they're good at working in groups. Now, as for the curse, let me explain a little bit more about how actions work in Legend in the Mist. In combat, when an action is successful, you can increase a relevant status on an enemy by an amount equal to your power. It's always at least 1, but the more positive tags you can invoke and the fewer negative things are impacting you, the more power you have. If you, say, had a power of 2, you could cause an enemy to take 2 harm, or you could deal 1 harm and give them a trip tag or something like that, which might give your side of the battle an advantage going forward. For example, our pal Garen from earlier, who was swinging with his sword with a power of 4, when he connects with the dog boys, now has a power of 4 to spend. He could give them the harm 4 status, which would surpass the harm limit of the dog boys, which, depending on how the player describes their action, could result in driving them off, knocking them unconscious, or potentially cutting the first group of them down like, well, a dog in the street. But he could also make an argument for increasing their scare limit by narratively explaining that he's actually trying to not hit them with his sword, but intimidate them with a show of force so that hopefully they flee. He probably wouldn't be able to make an argument for parlay or lifting the curse though, because he's swinging a sword at them. You get the idea. So as you can see, their lift curse limit is 6, which is the highest it can possibly be under normal circumstances. Meaning, of course, that if you want to brute force this curse, you're gonna need some pretty powerful magic to do so. So I gave my conversion a trait called Curse of the Hound, which basically is a D&D-ified codification of their cursed form. Of course, it can be lifted if you manage to get the dog boy in question to perform 3 deeds of genuine kindness, but it can also be lifted by a 7th level casting of Remove Curse. So if breaking the curse is your aim, you either need to talk them down and make a plan, or be a 13th level cleric, I guess. Or just be friends with a 13th level cleric, honestly. They've also got a couple melee attacks, because of course they do. I gave them a bite and short sword attack, because biting is literally part of their whole thing, and I like the little sheathed weapon on the dog boy in his artwork, so they get that too. Also, speaking of the artwork, I gotta say, I love it. It's a huge part of the reason I decided to cover this specific monster, especially this guy's face. It's just flawless, no notes. Anyways, the 3 final traits I gave my conversion, which I thought were really fun, are all bonus actions. The first one is called Distract, which allows the dog boy to impose disadvantage on dexterity saves made by a creature within 5 feet, as long as they remain within 5 feet of that creature themselves until the end of their next turn. This isn't crazy, but it plays into the second bonus action called Harry. This is literally taken straight from the dog boy's consequence list, because at the end of the day, these guys aren't cold-blooded killers so much as they're thieves and miscreants. Harry forces a target to make a dex save, which they might have disadvantage on if one of the other dog boys is distracting them, and if the target fails, an item either chosen randomly or just by the GM is taken from the target and put into the dog boy's inventory. Stealing stuff is literally always an action that an NPC can do, but I feel like this isn't something you see actually put on a lot of stat blocks in any meaningful way, which you could argue puts it on the GM to figure it out, but I think this is a perfect example of why looking at other game systems can be beneficial to running games in D&D or any other system for that matter. The idea of monsters with more narrative or out-of-combat abilities is really cool, and there are tons of Legend in the Mist creatures that have a really unique take on that kind of thing. The way they handle social encounters with game mechanics is really neat. Take, for example, the Respected Elder or Stern Magistrate stat blocks. They take something that would normally be entirely reliant on a couple die rolls and persuasion or intimidation if we're using D&D, and turn them into complex challenges which you're supposed to navigate based on your character's origins, lived experiences, goals, and weaknesses. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with ripping a couple skill checks to quickly resolve a social encounter, or even going the other way and role-playing the entire thing with no mechanics other than the words being spoken by the GM and the players. All I'm saying is that there's a secret third option which blends both narrative roleplay and game mechanics mechanics in a much more intertwined way, which is cool to see. But that's enough gushing about the potential of having a conversation with an old person. There's one more ability I gave my dog boy conversion that might be one of my favorite monster abilities of all time. The verbal roasting bonus action is inspired by the dog boy's first consequence, where they laugh at someone making fun of their shortcomings and give them the provoked status. In the case of D&D characters, that's gonna be a wisdom saving throw as you try to ignore the creatures using language to describe you just being awful at something. If you fail that save, your next action must be an attack against the dog boy who roasted you, and you have disadvantage on the roll because you're just so dang mad. Truly, this is the fantasy equivalent of being roasted by some Gen Alpha kid on TikTok using words you don't even understand, but carry a weight of disrespect nonetheless. But with all that said, hopefully you've got a good idea of what the boys are and what they're all about, and I'm sure you've already got a few ideas brewing about how you might use them at the game table, but let me pitch a few of my own your way. I love to throw a group of weird little mischief makers at my adventuring party just to provide a potentially light-hearted obstacle in their path. In the dog boy stat conversion, I included a little D4 table of potential mischief they might be getting up to, ranging from things like petty theft in the town market to digging up loot at the local cemetery. Any kind of nuisance that isn't life or death is a great way to deploy these guys because they're not really the type to be out here enacting grand schemes of world domination. They're basically just bored teenagers with a chip on their shoulder. You could also have them getting up to some tomfoolery that they think is mostly innocent fun, but is actually putting themselves and everyone else at a huge risk. Maybe they've started stealing magic potions from traveling heroes and pouring them into this weird pond they found because it makes all these fantastic colors and shapes appear. But little do they know, this pond is actually a magic reservoir that is absorbing the latent magic in these potions and feeding it to a lich's phylactery or something. Or maybe they've been tricked into this dark purpose by an evil overlord who is using the dog boys to aid in his schemes. They all think that he's just the cool old man who took them in and acts as their leader in a ring of petty theft, but the old man is actually up to something much more sinister. Or maybe you have a party who is interested in helping lift the curse of the dog boys. They could go on a quest to find someone powerful enough to do it, or in some kind of reverse my name is Earl situation, they end up helping the dog boys find kindness in their heart to have the curse lifted organically. The party might even be approached by a young man who used to be a dog boy and now wants the gang's help in lifting the curse on all of his friends. Or maybe the witch who originally cast the curse is now seeing the error in her ways, and as the streets are teeming with dog boys who didn't actually learn anything and instead just became more insufferable, is beseeching the party for help in undoing the thing that she did in the first place. If you don't want it to be a whole thing though, you could always have them stand in for a more interesting type of bandit encounter on the road with that whole bag of tricks, and maybe the curse doesn't come up at all, or maybe it does. And if you happen to be adventuring in a mystical realm akin to the Feywild, or even just dealing with some kind of creatures from such a place, I also feel like dog boys would be a great fit there too. They could be minions of a powerful archfey, or even just a group of people who wandered into the archfey's wood and found themselves cursed for trespassing where they don't belong. Or maybe they're not even cursed. Maybe they're just like that. You guys all know how much I love to see a dog species option in an RPG, so perhaps you have an entire people who are just these weird dog guys. They could have originated from a cursed group of individuals, but now they're just dog boys doing what dog boys do. Cursed or no, maybe you've got a player in your game though who makes a dog boy character. This could definitely work in D&D pretty easily, but if you're playing in Legend in the Mist, there's actually a really specific and cool way to do this, I think. At character creation in Legend in the Mist, one of the pre-generated options is literally that you were cursed. The game does provide a bunch of different options here for character tags that might be relevant to you, but you could easily just make one for a cursed dog boy character. One of the things this game does that's pretty cool is that for each character theme card you have, there's a quest, which is like a goal you're working towards related to that specific theme. This can be anything from wanting to make your parents proud to slaying a dragon who threatens the destruction of the world. So for a dog boy, that quest might be to perform 3 acts of kindness. In game, whenever you complete 3 milestones related to your quest, it evolves that theme, and that lines up perfectly with the 3 acts of kindness thing. Every time you do one, you mark off your little milestone, and if you manage to do all 3, you break your curse, and the theme might evolve to reflect that. Maybe it changes from your accursed past into the Heart of Gold personality trait, or if you abandon the quest entirely, it becomes something darker as you embrace the monstrous side of yourself, giving up on lifting the curse forever. But however you choose to use this creature, whether it be in D&D, Legend in the Mist, or some other game, you can find my 5e conversion in the form of a Google document linked down below, and you can find the official Legend in the Mist version in the narrator's core book on page 132. Thank you so much to Legend in the Mist for bringing us here this week to talk about one of the fantastic creatures featured in their game. If you want to check out Legend in the Mist for yourself, now is an amazing time to do so, and you can make that happen by clicking on the link in the description down below and heading over to their website. The physical books are set to ship out in January, however the PDF is available now, and if you buy the physical copy of the game, you get the PDF right away so you can start playing immediately. They've also got some very cool acorn-shaped D6s that come in a little scroll case, which adds a nice touch to the rustic fantasy vibe, and they're just kind of fun. Legend in the Mist is on sale right now until after Black Friday, so get it while the getting's good. In case it wasn't obvious from this video or the other times I've talked about it, I love this game. I think it's super creative, and if it sounds like something that might be even remotely interesting to you, I highly recommend checking it out. All of the character creation stuff is so intuitive and translative between the games of the same genre. I've been using it as an aid for fleshing out NPCs in other games that I run in completely different systems. It's straight up just so helpful to have a list of character traits, values, weaknesses, and goals for any important NPC regardless of system, so if nothing else, you should at least consider taking that for a spin because it's fun as hell. And if you're interested in bringing a 5e character over to Legend in the Mist to do some adventuring with a familiar face in a new system, they do have a 5e crossover guide available 100% for free on their store, which is honestly something I recommend checking out even if you're not system swapping a character. It's quick to read, and it's got some useful info for anyone that might be more familiar with a game system like Dungeons & Dragons. Anyways, I look forward to hearing about how the Dog Boys might make an appearance in your TTRPG of choice, and as always, thank you for watching. This shan't be the last we hear from Legend in the Mist this month. I've got another video coming out that's handling something a bit more dire, but I've already said too much, so I will see you in the next one. Until then.